On with our next panel, and our first speaker is the person who is my co-conspirator and actually got me into IWP, and that's Marek Chodakiewicz. And I'd like to call him, everybody in the room I think knows him, you have his bio, he holds the Kosciuszko chair at IWP, and what he doesn't know about the history of the region isn't worth knowing. And he's going to address us on the foreign and defense policies of Central and Eastern Europe. Marek, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Sebastian, for the shill. I just should be silent. That's the best way to operate in the intermarium. Then you don't offend anybody, because everybody has an idea of his own, and that is called diversity. Ladies and gentlemen, so nice to see you. Thank you so much for waking up so early and being with us. Thankfully, the weather is not nice, so you're not missing much outside. I'm a historian, so I'm not going to steal anyone's thunder, and we try to complement one another at the Institute of World Politics as opposed to compete and hate one another. So I will talk about history. I would like to address the topic of solidarity or not. In other words, intermarium in crisis times. Intermarium, the lands between the Black and Baltic Seas and the Adriatic. The region consists of historic states, ethno-nationalist states, or both. Most of them, because of Hitler and Stalin, tend to be uniform. Most of them. Few have substantial minorities anymore. Jews are gone because of the Holocaust. They were murdered, and the Germans were expelled or fled in the wake of World War II. Of the historic states, the most prominent ones are Poland and Hungary. The rest tend to be ethno-nationalist, with the exception of Lithuania, which is ethno-nationalist, but it invokes a great history and legacy of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, where, by the way, my family is from the province of Mstislav. And here, Sebastian is Polish. He's been only Hungarian for the past 200 years, so. The Gorkas are a medieval Polish family. That's not a joke. Since 1848, he's been vacationing in Hungary. Yes, went there and got stuck. I will talk about World War II, the interwar period, World War I, the interwar period, World War II, and the dissolution of, or implosion of the Soviet Empire and its aftermath. I am not going to discuss the merit of anyone's attitude towards one's neighbors. Instead, I'll just give you a laundry list of what a neighbor did to another neighbor. I would like you to pay attention to this, because if history is any guide, we are up for trouble. There is a distinct lack of solidarity in the intermarium, with the exception of Poles and the Hungarians. And there's really no geopolitical or any other explanation other than cultural affinity for historical reasons that the Poles and Hungarians are the only people in the intermarium who get along. It's bizarre, it's strange, but that's what it is. It's been like this for a long time. That is probably the only bright light in that region, as far as having any opinion about one's neighbor. Usually opinions about one's neighbors are poor. So let me give you a short list. During World War I and its aftermath, in particular following the dissolution of the Hohenzollern, Habsburg and Romanov empires, the peoples of the intermarium were at each other's throats. immediately. The Poles fought all their neighbors, of course the Germans and the Russians, as always, but also Lithuanians, Czechs or Czechoslovakian forces, Ukrainians, and Belarusians. Why? Well, Poland imagined itself to be the successor to the Commonwealth, the old Commonwealth from the 18th century, and it wanted to reacquire as much of its former glory and lands and peoples as it had back in the day. Hungary, which was punished severely at Trianon, clashed also with all its neighbors. It didn't have as much strength as Poland did, so it bore the brunt of its conflict with Romanians in particular, but also Czechoslovaks and Yugoslavs. Bulgaria clashed with Romania, Yugoslavia and Greece, and most importantly, all states had to face, almost all except for the Yugoslavs and Albanians, had to face the Bolshevik power in one form or another. And unfortunately, all states compromised with Lenin. The minute the Bolsheviks offered a bone to anybody, the bone was taken. The Estonians couldn't care less what would happen to the Latvians because they had a chance to sign some kind of an agreement with the Bolsheviks, and so did everybody else. The Poles horribly failed to back White Russians and other counter-revolutionary forces because Marshal Pilsudski thought that the Bolsheviks were less evil than the Whites. The Whites were completely deluded because they wanted to reincorporate all the lands, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, into the great Russian Empire that they were going to resurrect. But once again, the states of the Intermarium did not coordinate. In fact, the Lithuanians colluded with the Bolsheviks against the Poles. I have no idea who in Kaunas would think that the Bolsheviks would treat Lithuanians nicely after the victory over the Poles. Yet, that's what happened. And the Poles didn't care what occurred against the White forces or the Eastern Ukrainian forces because they had their own business. In a way, narrowly defined national interests triumphed over a vision of solidarity. That's what happened during World War I and its aftermath. Those nations were unable to unite. And it was mostly in their interest to carry out Churchill's project to strangle Bolshevism in its cradle. And they failed. During the interwar period, we witnessed two main features afflicting the Intermarium, namely irredentist minorities in every state, number one, and number two, foreign policy that was geared not towards either the German or the Soviet danger, but against one another. Hate thy neighbor was the rule, and beggar thy neighbor too. So, in Yugoslavia, which was dominated by the Serbs, who, by the way, destroyed Montenegro, the only allied country of World War I, which disappeared, the Croats and Slovenes felt stifled. They quickly developed resentments for a variety of reasons, for the state was not theirs. It was dominated by the Serbs. The Bosniaks felt alienated too. You can't have a large multi-ethnic state without some solidarity. Then in Romania, the majority which dominated the state, the Romanian majority, considered Hungarians, Jews, Germans and Bulgars virtually traitors, or at least a fifth column. I guess the strongest, one of the strongest pillars of Magyardom in Transylvania, that following Trianon accrued to Romania, were Jews, because they were heavily Magyarized. So there was more than a whiff of anti-Jewish animus in Transylvania, which was also expressed in anti-Magyar, anti-Hungarian terms. In Poland, the Polish state, which claimed to be an avatar of the Commonwealth of old, in fact assembled itself on ethno-nationalist and civic nationalist basis, so Polishness and Polish identity predominated to the detriment of Ukrainians, Belarusians, Jews, Germans, Lithuanians, and perhaps not the Tatar and the Karaim, who were overall, if you read their press and look at their activities, were rather happy in the Polish state. But they were tiny minorities. They still, by the way, exist in contemporary Lithuania, both the Tatars and the Karaim. In Czechoslovakia, even though it was a liberal democracy, and the minorities more or less were respected, the Hungarians felt most uncomfortable. Very soon the Slovaks became alienated. They believed they were tricked by the Czechs, so they wanted out of the Union. And the Germans increasingly, under the influence of the Nazis, in particular in the 1930s, became a force or an excuse which led to the destruction of the Czechoslovak state. As far as foreign policy in the intermarium, in the interwar period, there was primarily hostility towards neighbors, even though there were attempts to block certain interests together, not against the Soviets so much, not against the Germans, but against one another. Little towns, so-called little towns, which consisted of Romania, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia, was set up solely to stick it to Hungary. Yes, Hungary, the greatest threat, with Stalin and Hitler around the corner. Poland was the pivot. It only loved Hungary. It liked Estonia and Latvia. Supposedly it had a formal alliance with Romania, which the Romanians didn't value too much because they thought the Poles preferred Hungary, which they did. You understand the madness. Poland was a beneficiary of Versailles, and it didn't act like it. In 1918 and 19, the Czechoslovak army attacked Polish majority areas in Silesia and took them over. The Poles reciprocated after Hitler partitioned Czechoslovakia. They said, hey, it's majority Polish, let's attack. When, in the interest of Poland, was to maintain the arrangement of Versailles. Complete and sheer idiocy. Now, Lithuania had a claim on Poland, on the Polish city of Vilna, which is Vilnius, the ancient capital of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. So the Lithuanians torpedoed every single Polish effort to build an alliance with the Baltic states against the Soviets. Ta-da! Hello? As someone I know says, Stalin was around the corner. Well, it didn't matter. There was a state of war between Poland and Lithuania, or at least a lack of peace. Sometimes there were border accidents, and following one where a Polish border guard was shot, Poland threatened war against Lithuania unless Lithuania signed a peace treaty. and established diplomatic relations, but it was 1938. Bulgaria, so in the Baltics, there was no Polish, Lithuanian, Latvian, Estonian axis. Just complete sheer insanity. Bulgaria was sitting there pouting and isolated and ostracized, and it was sharpening its teeth to reacquire that which had been taken away from Bulgaria, not only following World War I, but also the Balkan Wars, which occurred right before the First World War. If you think the interwar period, or the post-World War I crisis were bizarre, then look at World War II. What we had during World War II was the dwarfs in the intermarium enmeshed in a civil war, then some of them joining the Axis alliance in various capacity, and finally switching to the Soviet alliance. So let me give you a whistle-stop tour of this performance in the intermarium, again lacking solidarity. There was a civil war in Poland. The Poles were fighting Ukrainians, Belarusians, Lithuanians, Latvians, and ethnic Germans. I'm not talking about reciprocity here. In fact, the Ukrainians indulged in the most vicious ethnic cleansing campaign, claiming tens of thousands of lives of Poles. Why? Well, they saw that the Soviets deported a chunk of the Polish population. They also saw how efficient the SS was with Ukrainian auxiliaries in the Holocaust. Hey, why not get rid of the Poles? It was a crime of opportunity, ethnic cleansing. The Ukrainian nationalists fought against the Poles and cleansed them, Soviets and Jews. In Yugoslavia, to confuse things, the Serbs were fighting against Serbs. There were two types of Chetniks: royalist Chetniks who were loyal to the government in exile under Draža Mihailović, and pro-German Chetniks who were fighting royalist, pro-Western Chetniks. They were dressed the same, by the way, to confuse things. And they were also fighting against the communists. And they were fighting against the Croats, all of them. A little bit against the Slovenes and the Bosniaks. So if you see a picture of people in SS uniforms on their knees praying, that's the SS Handschar division. And they were all killing each other. They cared more about getting at each other's throats than about figuring anything about Germany or the Soviet Union. When the giants clashed, the dwarfs jumped at one another. So let's look at the Axis alliance. I submit that most joined the Axis. Most joined the Axis to spite the neighbors and to secure guarantees from Berlin against the neighbors' claims on their territory, or to advance claims on the territories of their neighbors. There may be two exceptions from that rule, namely Slovakia and Croatia, puppet states created because of Hitler's march into the intermarium. Both those states joined the Axis alliance and supplied troops and assistance to Hitler because they wanted to show how independent they were. As far as other countries are concerned, the most prominent, in Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, they joined for geopolitical reasons, because better Hitler than Stalin, that's what their governments decided, and because they opposed their neighbors. They opposed their neighbors. There was, we talk about the Nazi alliance or the Axis. Arguably, there hasn't been a more unruly alliance with less solidarity, with the Germans having enormous troubles with the Allies. In 1939, the Hungarians marched into Slovakia. Do you know why? They wanted a border with Poland and grab a chunk of the old Hungarian kingdom. This led to an air war against Hungary. That means Axis Hungarian planes and Axis Slovak planes were strafing, bombing, and shooting at each other. Yes, the Luftwaffe was not happy. Indeed. On the Eastern Front, the Hungarian and Romanian forces were assigned to the south. They only didn't come to blows. Forget about any cooperation. They didn't come to blows because they were separated by the Italians who tried to mediate. The Hungarians refused to take orders from the Germans when the Germans tried to tell them to collaborate with the Romanians against the Soviets. This is the kind of an alliance it was. And Slovaks and Romanians accused the Hungarians correctly of protecting Jews and colliding with the Poles, and sometimes looking the other way when Ukrainian anti-Nazi and communist insurgents were operating in Hungarian-held areas. This was all to the great fury of Hitler. Why did the Hungarians and the Romanians and Bulgarians join? Now, Bulgarians refused to send a single soldier to the Eastern Front. They never broke diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union. In fact, Sofia dispatched one Red Cross train. That was the extent of Bulgaria's participation in the invasion of the Soviet Union. And again, the Nazis were furious. But the Bulgarians got what they wanted. They wanted chunks of land from Romania, Yugoslavia, and Greece, which they had lost before, and they got it. In the first Vienna Award, the Hungarians got northern Transylvania, and they were holding fast to it. Then there was a switch of alliances. Romania and Bulgaria went over to the Soviet side when the Soviets approached. Romania's joining the Soviet Union was a greater disaster for the German armies than Stalingrad. Entire army groups fell apart in the Balkans. The Romania simply switched sides to stick it to the Hungarians so they could participate in an invasion of Hungary and reclaim the lands that the Hungarians had reclaimed from them. And then the Bulgarians joined the invasion, only to lose all the lands. 500,000 Bulgarian troops were lost, fighting against their very kind and nice ally, Germany, erstwhile ally, on the side of the Soviets. Prior to that, hardly any Bulgarian troops had been lost. And then we're approaching another crisis moment, 1989. It was an anomaly. There was anti-communist solidarity, support for freedom from neighbors, from Poland as early as 1985, maybe earlier. Fighting solidarity emissaries, underground emissaries, made it all the way to Vladivostok. They hooked up with Tatars, Georgians, and others in a huge display of solidarity. In fact, some of the first contacts were established in Vilnius between Home Army and Lithuanian Gulag survivors, dinosaurs, who gave contacts to the Poles for the Tatars. It was bizarre, but there was solidarity all over. That entailed not only support for freedom of neighbors, but neglect for transborder minorities. It was assumed that the Lithuanians, Ukrainians, and others will do the right thing, say about the Polish minorities. The Hungarians counted on the same in Transylvania. And the Romanians thought warmly about Moldova. So what has happened since? Let's look at foreign policy and minorities. Well, the most vociferous about its minorities is Hungary, because Hungary is surrounded by Hungarians. There are simply more Hungarian minorities abutting Hungary than it is the case anywhere else in Europe. That's how, that is how ill-conceived Trianon was. Hungary is very vociferous about protecting its minorities against Romania, Slovakia, less Croatia, but very much now in Ukraine. The Hungarians said, we're not going to support you, Kiev, unless you give autonomy and extensive rights to the Hungarian minority. Now, the Poles don't say anything like this, and there are no really Polish actions against the Ukrainian government, no pressure. However, there is pressure against the government of Minsk, Belarus. And there is certainly increasingly, and it worries me, bad blood between the government of Poland and the government of Lithuania over the treatment of Polish minority. Now let's look at foreign policy. Bad news, the Czechs were the first ones to bolt and break solidarity. Almost immediately after 1989, they thought, if we get rid of the Slovaks, we'll get into the EU, because, you know, the Slovakia is a basket case, so let's get rid of them. And they were really very happy. They tried to embrace all sorts of progressive measures and make themselves as sexy as possible, as fast as possible. Nothing happened. They were only admitted to first NATO and then the EU when everybody else was. So had they stayed in tune with solidarity, the results would have been the same. And it wouldn't have set up a precedent. Then it's best to go it alone when you're a dwarf. The Czechs deluded themselves. They could do anything. Yes, it's almost over. Hungary pursues now implied irredentist policies, because that is the implication. Romania, following a half-hearted attempt to absorb Moldova, woos Moldova. Well, it's mostly Romanian speaking. Poland is not a leader, too much. Why? Well, first of all, there's the post-Soviet malaise, post-Soviet elites, etc. But mostly, I think it's smart. The Poles are not overactive because they don't have the power. And any move by the Poles would be construed as Polish imperialism by the neighbors. The Poles don't know how to attract the way they knew how to attract my family in the 14th century. They don't anymore. So what we need is more solidarity in the intermarium and US leadership. Because without the US, not much is going to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marek, for the true tour d'horizon. I think there's the conventional wisdom about the history of Central and Eastern Europe, and then there's Marek's reality, which I'm going to quote you, is the bizarre geopolitics of the region, and thank you for opening our eyes to that. Now I'd like to call to the floor Ambassador Žygimantas Pavilionis, who has a fascinating background that ranges from energy security to getting the EU to understand the importance of totalitarian histories, and he's going to give us his perspective on the reality today. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here, and we've been speaking about the blood and history. Well, I have a drop of Polish blood, I have a drop of Tatar blood, but I'm Lithuanian, and this is our crowd speaking, so I feel at home. And more about the name entitled, I think this is the 5th year of me being an ambassador. I'm outgoing in 2 months. I'm back to my beloved Eastern France. But I think during those 5 years, well, in every second meeting I was mentioning the name Kosciuszko. I did it when I presented my credentials to President Obama, saying that, you know, once we had one interesting big state that was called the European Union of the Middle Ages by John Paul II. When we turned to American together, we drafted or we copied American Constitution. We've been attacked. Kosciuszko, our Kosciuszko, General Kosciuszko joined American ranks. But let me, you know, I will come back to that theme by the end of my little statement. But also, let me say that I agree with the essence of two latest speakers, and I will start with the strategy. Well, I am a representative of the age of the strategy, of Reagan generation, you can say. My soul is saved, and Lithuania is booming today because of the vision created by President Reagan. That was Europe whole and free. Then we united everything. Well, then the West united all the instruments they have to rescue our souls. And we've been working in solidarity, underground or in different other ways. That was great and that worked. We don't have it now, I agree completely. For last 10 years I was chairing, well, for last 2 years in those 10 years I was chairing strange organization whose headquarters are in Warsaw, called Community of Democracies. And with sadness in my voice and with Freedom House and other organizations, we've been counting the democracies who've been wiped out from the map in that period of 10 years. Of 10 years of strategic recess, of no vision, no leadership. And let me then be a bit more concrete, like ambassador or diplomat. And I'm 23 years diplomat. What I mean by that? Let's go to NATO. I remember Hillary Clinton in Chicago. I was sitting just behind her. And she said, next NATO summit will be enlargement summit. Well, we had next NATO summit in UK. It was not an enlargement summit. We have next NATO summit in Warsaw. I hope it will be enlargement summit, because when we have agenda, when we push, when we lead, when we are not in defensive, we win. And I want to win. And I was also present in Bucharest NATO summit when we lost the case for Ukraine and Georgia, who was demanding membership, and they don't. Well, map, you know, we've been blocked together with Polish president and others. We've been fighting for that. What's the consequence? We have occupations. Yes, land grabs. Because for Putin it was a clear sign. Those states are mine. Thank you, the West. Big gift. You know, I was waiting for so long. And he did it. We have those troops. Because of our strategic indecisiveness. Because of lack of strategic vision. Let's come back to EU. Well, EU is my baby, you know. I was doing EU for 16 years. I was the first diplomat appointed to make EU. And I was the last to see the accession signature. I was deputy chief negotiator for our accession. I am a baby of enlargement. I'm happy. My economy is booming. You know, before global economic crisis, it was 12% GDP. Now it's 4%. It's okay, you know. We are now 75% of EU average. I remember then we've been, I don't know, 2, 3. I remember when my salary was $5 a month. Now it's okay because of enlargement. Where is enlargement now? Non-existent. You know, today, actually yesterday and today, we are drafting some kind of language on Ukraine for Riga in Eastern Partnership Summit. And this is bad. We have a lot of friendly states who are deleting anything that is already achieved and agreed on Ukraine. You know, deleting it all perspective, all light in the end of the tunnel. And you know who's fighting for Ukrainians? Mostly just my country. I will come back to that. Well, yes, there is a lack of solidarity. If, you know, just, I could say even more. We are selling that country for very interesting reasons. Then let's then turn to energy. Well, it was mentioned, you know, oil prices. Yes, I agree. With those falling oil prices, we can achieve a lot, because mostly those are autocratic, totalitarian states who are controlling energy resources. And just, a year ago, Lithuania was paying the highest prices for gas in Europe, because we were stupid enough to sell our gas networks to Gazprom. They promised, of course, the best prices, and we finally were paying 6 times more than Americans now paying today. With our little salaries, that was something. We made conclusions. We were first in the region to build our LNG terminal. We have it. We hope Poles will open soon their own. We hope some other neighbors will do the same. And price immediately dropped. And actually, we kicked off Gazprom from Lithuania in general. We introduced most aggressive so-called unbundling directive, opened the market for competitors, and Gazprom is out. Gazprom is in the court, actually, today. And you know that story. Commission approved that recently. So when I turn to America and I start saying, guys, you have that nice LNG revolution. I need your gas. I need your exports. And you know what? When I come to Cheniere, and my Minister of Energy yesterday met the president of Cheniere from Louisiana, well, they are good guys, but they say, oh, look, we are entering into the market by the end of the year, but everything is sold out till 24, because other terminals, they don't have licenses to export. You have a lot of gas in this country, but you cannot export. You don't have a vision that it actually would help democracies to survive. And then I am shouting on the hill, I really want America to be America, because what I learned in different universities where I graduated, that market is saving us from dictators. So please create market in global, please create global gas market. And you are not. You also have the ban on oil exports, by the way. And oil supplies to Lithuania was shut down in 2006 when Vice President Cheney visited my great country. I still remember his great speech on energy security. Putin was so much impressed that he closed the pipeline, so-called Druzhba, of friendship. Thanks God we had oil terminal then. Well, we sold our oil refinery to Poles. Oh, that of course aggravated the case. We don't have oil supplies by this pipe till today. Putin is still fixing it. So where is strategy from the Hill on energy? Do you have it? Somebody mentioned information and brainwashing. Oh, I would agree. You know that in America you have 97 million viewers of Russia Today. CNN has a bit more than 100 million. Do you know that Russia Today on YouTube has the highest hits a day? It's about 1 billion a day. Isn't it impressive? They did it in 3 years. With big money they steal from their own people. And, we do nothing. If you compare the budget of Voice of America with Russia Today, it's 40 times less. Not 4, not 10, it's 40. Those guys, you should visit them. They are nice dinosaurs from Cold War, but they have just few rooms, actually. And any studio in a village of Lithuania is actually better. Yes, we are full with Nordic capital. Wi-Fi is the fastest in the world in Lithuania. Well, we should make some investments in that area, because they brainwash not us, they brainwash Americans. Mm-hmm. It's about America, not about how much Russia occupies Ukraine. It's how bad you are. And that was done during all electoral campaigns. I remember I was coming to State Department, I saw a nice poster of Russia Today that President Bush killed 140,000 people in Iraq. That was in the middle of midterm elections. That's very interesting. How much Russia money will spend for next elections here? And it will make an impact. Don't worry. Americans don't notice, they deny it, but it will make an impact. Well, and let's talk Russia. Do we have a Russia policy? Oh no, we don't. We had a wonderful reset policy. Reset what? With whom? About what? I was always asking my friend Mike McFall, he's now in Stanford. I don't know about what, but we don't have a policy on Russia. Well, we say Minsk II, Minsk I, or whatever. That's about Ukraine. That's about obligations Ukrainians have to do. But what Russians have to do? What is the vision for Russia? Do we invest into new leadership there? Do we help, the future Russia to emerge? Do we really want democratic Russia? What do we do with KGB that rules that country for 100 years, that killed such a number of people on earth that, I wouldn't maybe start counting. But we shake hands, we come and smile, we invite to different anti-terrorism summit, the best of them. So do we have a strategy? No. Somebody mentioned democracy and human rights. You know, when I was doing that community of democracy stuff, 2010, I came to Washington, I met Albright and asked her, what about democracy in your program? You had those 3D. What about 4th D? Where is democracy? You know, I was kind of inspired, and you know, we were the first to revolt inside the Soviet Union against the Soviets. We just celebrated 25 years anniversary, inspired by Solidarność. You know, I thought America is a beacon of democracy and freedom. Do you really fight for freedom and democracy today? No. Actually, you have deals with those strange countries. And usually those countries are killing us. So you know, what about alliances with us? How much money you spend for democracy and freedom? In EU, in our glorious EU, we spend maybe 1.5% of our development budget for democracy. Oh, nice. That's interesting. But in Washington, are you serious about that? Big question. Let's turn to Baltics and military. Yes, somebody mentioned, you know, first tanks, well, or kind of, how do they call, presence, operational presence of troops, maneuvering. Actually, we are very glad with those American tanks because they arrived first time, you know, we've been waiting for long. 30,000 troops died after the Second World War. We've been also fighting Soviets. All of them died. We've been waiting for Americans. We've been learning English because we had some strange rumor that Americans will come by the end of the month. So my guerrilla warriors were learning it. They didn't. Now they came after 70 years, more or less. We are very happy. That's okay. But that's not enough. You know, when I see brigades stationed around the Denmark border in Germany, it seems that, you know, Washington thinks that Denmark is under attack today. No. You know, maybe I don't need brigade. I need battalion in Lithuania. Because if we speak military, it has more deterrent effect than any kind of brigades on nice shores of Italy. I understand it's important there, but you know, threat is in the Baltics today. Where are those battalions? Where is prepositioning that we need? And we could host you well. We have host nation support that is strong. Our militaries are strong. Our special forces are fighting today in Afghanistan, and they're one of the best in the region. But we have to make it visible. Well, we have a lot of missiles already in Kaliningrad that can reach any point in Poland or in Germany or in Lithuania. What do we do together? Well, we have some plans on missile defense. Interesting. Let's do it together. Because it's serious what's happening in the region. Oh, yes, we maneuver. We have those, you know, maneuvers. We have different kind of exercises. I agree. The biggest NATO exercise in my region was 9,000 troops. Half of them Poles, another half Lithuanians, and 120 Americans. When Russians do their exercises, snap exercises, in 48 hours they generate 160,000 troops. 9,000, 160,000. Are we serious enough with the threat they do in the region? I'm not so sure. Well, we try to be serious, at least with what we have. We increased from last year, defense spending in Lithuania was increased by 60%. Now we will jump by 30, 40 each year. We didn't stop with professional army, but we returned to conscripts. Everybody's joining army. I will join my army when I'm back in 2 months, because that's serious. You know, I don't want my 4 kids to be killed by Soviets, because usually that happens with diplomats in Lithuania. So then I'm turning to the region and Poland and Ukraine, my favorite subject. Well, and speaking Ukraine, guys, you know, the whole Congress voted for lethal assistance to Ukrainians. The whole Congress, in bipartisan vote. And each day I'm coming to administration and asking them, please do it. You know, today I have a report of 1 Ukrainian killed in Mariupol, another wounded. You know, it's kind of usual stuff. 10, 15 Ukrainians a day. It's not on CNN anymore. But, you know, that's something terrible. We have we have close to 7,000 already killed on the eastern border. It's more than twice of Americans who perished in Afghanistan. It's serious. It's becoming Balkans type. Do we really need some kind of Balkan scenario in the whole region to wake up? And I'm really fed up when I hear those statements, oh, this is a wake-up call. But you know, if they take Mariupol, this will be a serious wake-up call. Then my minister is coming to Washington and saying, how many wake-up calls you need to wake up? You know, 2008, Georgia occupied. Lithuania was again the only voice in Brussels saying, no, it's bad to return to business as usual. The only voice. Everybody forgot that. My president in 2008 and me, we said Crimea will be next. In 2008, nobody was listening to us. Crimea is taken. Then we said Eastern Ukraine will be next. Nobody was listening to us. Nobody. And it's rolling on. So please, guys, do it now. Because if any weaponry that Ukrainians need to arrive to Ukraine, it will take about 30, 40 days. What Russians can do in 30, 40 days, I don't know. They can reach any place in that region. And Ukrainians simply, they don't have weaponry that stops very modern Russian tanks. You know, their weaponry is of 70s. And Russian tanks are very good. But you have it. You have it. You have the whole list that is needed. So let's do something about that. And then you mentioned economic sanctions. Because those peaceful people on everywhere here, you know, they say, you know, it will provoke Russia. But what we can do, we can introduce harsh economic sanctions. We can turn off economic lights in Russia. Yes, they can. Russians trade in dollars. All dollars are going through New York. You just make it. Oops, and done. And they will beg you for negotiations. But it's not done. You know, after a little attack in Ukraine, we just include 2, 3 names to different visa lists. Well, okay, some skiers will not be so good in Austria, but it's not about that, you know. Let's be serious. Let's make it very clear what kind of cost they pay if they do something. And that's not happening. So now I'm turning to lessons of history. Yes, somebody mentioned Hitler, somebody mentioned Reagan. This is exactly what's happening. You know, I like that Reagan library close to LA. I will now, in 30 days, I will open my permanent consulate general in LA for the West Coast in Reagan library, just because of that reason. Because they have wonderful wall and different speeches of Reagan about communism. And what I always remember, you know, don't ever try to accommodate communists. Don't, you know, appeasement leads to your final defeat. It's like, you know, sausages. You give, they eat, they come, and they kill you finally. This is what's happening. We didn't learn from history. We didn't learn from history where we've been fighting with each other. We just appease the tiger. It, you know, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, whatever, Georgia, Sarkozy plan, another plan. It's, you know, just between us, this is just selling them off. Do you think they will stop? Complete nonsense. They are provoked by our weakness. They are provoked by our wish of negotiations. That was my twice Prime Minister Kubilius who recently said what you just said right now. You know, in Vilnius region we have so-called region of Krasnaya, whatever, Krasnucha we've been calling. Reds, they were living there. When you meet those gangsters, if you start to negotiate, that's the end of it. You either beat them immediately, or you call the police. Police is non-existent in those areas. You know, Washington sometimes also. Or you run, and you give up. We don't want to give up. We don't want to run. You know, and this is the psychology. You cannot negotiate. This is KGB. They kill. They do not negotiate. You should understand it. This is a fact. This is a reality. We should wake up, see the reality, and then do something. Create those strategies, and we will be winning. Don't worry. We have enough strength and enough money and enough experience. Well, 1,000 on Lithuanian side, more or less the same on Polish side. And here I come to very, very close to the region. And we have to draw lessons from history as well. Well, I remember the time I was then deputy minister. Yes, okay, minute. I was then deputy minister. That was under President Kaczynski, who crashed in Smolensk. We've been moving like empire, together. We've been strategizing and thinking like empire, and we've been winning. You know, well, I wouldn't say about revolutions in different places, but we've been always on the front lines, together. And I remember the President Kaczynski telling me, you know, those in the West, they ask me to stay with them, go into different triangles. But you know what? I will better be first in the region with you than the last with them. I think that was right. And that was what Kosciuszko was doing. We need you, dear Poles. We need you humble. We don't need you nationalist. You are big, but that's exactly what President Kaczynski was telling to me always. You know, don't call me big. I hate it. We are equal. You know, I'm black belt Taekwondo. In Taekwondo, one of the principles, be humble. Even if you are fourth dan, or what, the more dans you have, the more humble you should be. This is exactly, you know, how we should perceive your strength. Be humble and wise, and be strategic. We have to unite the people. We have to, maybe, even if Washington is not leading, this is our time to lead. Because we are representative of bloodlands, we lost every third of us. Those lessons are so much painful. We have to stay together. And I will tease you now and provoke you now. In Kiev today, two nations are very visible. First of all, Georgians. Secondly, Lithuanians. Do you think we meet a lot of Poles there? No. Why? It's just a question. Well, we have speeches, but do we have those Poles on the ground helping? No. Then I have another provocation for you. When I ask my American Lithuanians, and they're a well-organized tribe, you know, 1/4 of my tribe is here. 1 million of Americans with Lithuanian descent. They are very organized. They are always with Ukrainians. When I ask them, where are Poles? They say they fight for visa waiver. Of course, that's important. But do you think this is very important today? This is very important for you like citizens. But you know, if we lose our heads, you will not need any visas. We need now fight for Ukraine. You have 10 million of citizens of this country with Polish descent. Let's go to the streets. I will organize my million. I will organize another 2 million of Ukrainians, well, Americans with Ukrainian descent, but I need you, because they listen to you. You know, different candidates to president comes to Poland right now. Will it be June 11? Bush is landing in Poland? Jeb, yeah, it's interesting. Why? Because you mean something. And let's do it together. Let's march to the streets. I remember Gorbachev was coming and trying to seduce another Bush about the Baltics. I had flags of Lithuanian, you know, sea of Lithuanian flags on the hill. We can do it. We do it. I'm doing personally twice in front of White House. Dangerous, risky. That's why I'm outgoing ambassador. But we can do it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I, for one, am very grateful for your undiplomatic speech. Two things I'd like to reiterate and echo. The first one that you open with, you really want America to be American. I think we have to think about that sentence. And then lastly, one that is incredibly sobering if you think about the 1920s and 30s. You're absolutely right that today, Ukrainians being killed is just business as usual. We have a few minutes before our coffee break, so questions please to either Dr. Chodakiewicz or the ambassador. Sir.
I have a question.
Can you wait for the microphone, please?
My name is John Trop, Polish-American Congress, New Jersey Division. I have a question for Ambassador Pavilionis. My question goes to what kind of NATO war games you would like to see played in the Baltic region and in northeastern Poland, keeping in mind that both Poland and Lithuania were threatened with nuclear attack during the Zapad autumn of 2009 maneuvers and the NATO war games played Steadfast Jazz in 2013. What do you think of those war games, Steadfast Jazz, as a response to Zapad?
It's good, but it's not enough. And just to make it brief, I need a military base in Lithuania, permanently stationed, and not only rotating until it is needed. You know, who will interpret this until or how much? I need it there. And anything that is created in Poland today, I need a link to Lithuania, because if I'm Russian, it's very easy. I learned from that glorious times of Lithuanian-Polish Empire. The more divide you Lithuanians and Poles, the better. Divide and rule. So if I'm Pole, if I'm Russian, I will immediately, you know, divide Baltics from Poland in a military action. So anything created in Poland should have a leg in Lithuania. We should, you know, keep it united, and it's not happening.
Over there.
Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. Rokas Benjus, United States Coast Guard. I have a question. Do you think that Mr. Putin is willing to use military force against a NATO country? You mentioned pushing NATO membership onto Ukraine and Georgia. Do you think he's actually willing to use military force against a NATO country, and how bad do you think it would escalate?
Well, I think he's preparing it. Some military analysts say that he's not capable to do it maybe until 2025, and that's why he's now preparing the ground, preparing the scene. As announced in military doctrine in Russia, the best preparation is soft power they have. Information, different attacks inside the country. They are preparing your elite not to resist. They divide, they corrupt, they mislead us. Oh, if you said they were preparing it in Ukraine for 10 years, the same happened in the Baltics. You know, from 2000 when Putin came to power, I start feeling it so big in Lithuania. A lot of KGB spies, a lot of operations, a lot of referendums, a lot of Greens turning red. You know, it's happening every day. It's, you know, it's a war, undeclared war, because all wars are undeclared today. It's a hybrid style, but that's happening. They are preparing it. And, you know, if I would be Russian, I would experiment with Baltic states just to show that NATO is non-existent, that Article 5 is zero, actually.
Okay, I think, would you like to add? Please, Marek.
No, I was going to.
No, I don't need a mic. So
Obviously.
I'd like to thank our speakers, both Marek and the ambassador, for the honesty and the candidness of their presentations. And if you'd express your thanks, I'd be very happy.